Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. I have a different type of video for you today. It's been over 30 years since I started making handmade stamps. I found that using handmade stamps on artwork helps to customize it and elevate the design. In this video, I'm going to show you how to carve various budget-friendly erasers using an X-Acto knife. Then I'll show you how to carve a printing block using a carving tool. Let's start with the erasers. Pink pearl erasers are the most budget-friendly option, but it can be challenging to use when carving a stamp. These erasers tend to be drier, which makes them harder to carve. I suggest starting by drawing a simple design like this leaf shape. There's no outer stem, just the elliptical shape with a few inner veins. I prefer to start by removing the outer sections first, then carving the inner sections. I find it easier to hold the eraser to carve small details once the outer sections are removed. I hold the X-Acto knife at a slight angle when carving because I find it easier to remove the sections of the eraser that aren't part of the final shape. Once I've scored the outer shape of the leaf, I begin cutting away smaller sections of the eraser. I find it easier to remove the excess eraser in small pieces rather than trying to cut away a large section all at once. If you try to remove too much at once, there is a chance you'll accidentally remove part of the shape you want to keep. Continue this process until all of the excess outer sections are removed. Once that is done, cut out the veins. Since the veining is thin, I angle the X-Acto knife inwards. I carve one side of the middle vein, then the other side. By doing this, the inner vein section can be easily removed, usually in one complete piece. Then carve the smaller vein section in the same way, holding the X-Acto knife at an inward angle. I like to do a test print to see if I need to remove more of the eraser or further shape the stamp before using it in my artwork. Looking at this print, the two right side veins don't connect to the middle vein, so I'm carefully removing those two small sections of the eraser. It's a minor detail that I could have left, but I want all the smaller veins to connect with the middle one. Once those tiny sections are removed, I do one more test print. You can see the slight difference between the two prints now. Before we move on to the next stamp, I want to mention that I'll use all the stamps made in this video in collages after the last stamp is carved, so stay to the end to see that. Staedtler eraser is a step up from the pink pearl. It's not as flaky or dry. Also, I like to use this brand because each eraser has a subtle pattern imprinted on both sides. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera yet. It's much easier to see once the stamp is inked. This imprint adds a nice detail to the stamp print. If you're new to making stamps and want to carve a word, remember that you must carve it backwards so it'll print correctly. I'm carving a simple word, love. I like to block out the letters first to make sure there's enough space between all four letters. I start with the first letter, then the last letter, and fill in the middle. It's good to darken the lines of the final shape so you can clearly see exactly where you need to carve. The word can be stylized by not cutting out the center of the letter O or the inner V shape of the letter V. This is very helpful if you're new to carving, and personally, I like the way it looks. However, if you're comfortable with carving, then go ahead and carve out those inner shapes. Again, I'm holding the X-Acto knife at a slight angle to cut the shape and remove small sections of the eraser. I did mention this in the previous section, but I find that moving the eraser around makes it easier to carve, especially for curved shapes like the letter O. Curved shapes like the letter O can be a bit challenging to carve at first. I'm okay with the letter not being perfectly shaped. This is a handmade stamp, so it isn't meant to be perfect. Notice how I'm cutting away the excess eraser in the letter E. First, I'm cutting on top of the eraser, then I'm taking the tip of the X-Acto knife and sticking it into the side of the sections to remove. I continue doing this for the rest of the stamp. Let's do a test print. Now you can see the pattern imprint I mentioned earlier. It adds a nice texture to the lettering. The print was good, but I wanted to see if I could slightly improve the shape of the letter O and V by smoothing the edges. The second print is better, but still not perfect. Like I mentioned, the stamp doesn't have to be perfect because it's handmade. In my opinion, Faber-Castell erasers are the best if you want an easy to carve stamp. They cut smoothly. My guess it has to do with the material used to make them dust-free, but I'm not entirely sure. Also, these erasers don't have an imprint like Staedtler's. For this stamp, I'm going with a simple geometric design. I decided to bring out a softer pencil, a 4B, to use to darken the line. I'll go back and forth between both pencils just to show you how I use them. I'll use the finer point pencil to get the initial shape exactly how I want it, then use the softer pencil to go over the final line to darken it. It's not necessary to use both, but I wanted to show you this as an option. Again, I'm angling the X-Acto knife inwards on both sides of the curved shape, so it's easier to remove the excess eraser section. I'm cutting the top section of the rectangles, then I'm taking the tip of the X-Acto knife and sticking it in the side of the sections to remove it. Let's do a test print. The first test print showed that the stamp was ready to use, but I wanted to print one more to see if I could get a clean image, and I did. Let's move on to the final stamp, which is the carving block. I'm using a 3" by 4" speedball carving block, but there are other brands that are just as good. While carving blocks and tools aren't overly expensive, it is an investment to purchase the tools. I bought this handle that came with several different blades. I usually use the number 2 blade that's currently in the handle, along with the thinnest one, which is the number 1. As with the erasers, you can freehand your designs if you're comfortable doing that. However, I wanted to show you how to transfer an image onto the block. These images are from a 1960s encyclopedia that I transferred onto tracing paper. I like to trace the image onto tracing paper to preserve the original image. It also allows me to alter the image to simplify the design, which I did for all 3 of these. All of them have about the same amount of detail, but I decided on the shell because I like the shape. And the simplified design is a good example for this tutorial. You can use transfer paper like Sorel to transfer the image onto the block, but instead I'm simply flipping the tracing paper over so the pencil lines are face down on the block. It's easy to retrace the image from the back so the graphite transfers directly onto the surface. I like using tape to secure the tracing paper so it doesn't shift. I also make sure to check the image while tracing it to make sure it's legible. I'm using the number 2 blade to carve around the outside of the image. I like to start by carving the larger or less detailed sections, then carving the smaller detailed ones. Again, you'll see me moving the block around so it's easier for me to carve. I suggest going slow when carving an image this size or larger. I sped up the footage and removed some of the sections to keep the pace of the video, but in real time it took me about 7 minutes from start to finish. Let's do a test print. I'm making sure to apply pressure as evenly as possible over the whole stamp. As you can see, I didn't put quite enough ink on the stamp, but I can still see that the innermost grooves are not completely carved out. I went ahead and removed that area off camera. Let's add these stamps to collages. I did a few more test prints of the shell stamp using a standard ink pad, but I couldn't get enough ink on it to get a good print. Because of that, I'm using block printing ink instead. I applied the ink to a small gel plate so I can evenly load it onto the brayer. Then I rolled the ink evenly on the stamp. If you haven't used block printing ink before, I suggest doing a few test prints on scrap paper first before printing directly on your artwork. Align the stamp on the collage, then apply even pressure across the backside. It turned out to be a good print. I also brought out another stamp to add a few short diagonal line details. This time I'm using a standard ink pad. I love the uneven handmade print that this stamp makes. Stamps add another layer of detail to a collage that makes it feel more visually pleasing. I'm using the leaf and love stamps for this second collage. This specific area of the collage looked a bit too plain because of the large area of light value paper. By adding multiple prints of the love stamp adds much needed contrast, specifically a light and dark value contrast. I also like the detail of printing the stamp slightly off the edge of the page. The leaf stamp will be more of a focal point pattern, whereas the love stamp blends into the existing gray stripe pattern. I didn't want to add one print of the leaf stamp in the same pink paper on the right side because I thought it wouldn't be a strong enough print in that area. Instead, I added one print of the love stamp in a vertical orientation. Instead of putting another stamp in the small white area below the leaf prints, I decided to bring out some monoprinted tissue paper and layer it over that area. This paper elevated the collage by adding multiple layers. I decided to add 2 more pieces of the tissue paper to balance the design and further build those layers. I'm using the geometric stamp for this vertical composition collage. I've mentioned in other videos that I like to include solid papers in busy designs to give the viewer's eyes a place to rest. However, I don't think this specific design is so busy that it's necessary to leave the solid light blue areas as is. These are the only areas where I'm adding stamp prints. Here's a tip for when you're printing stamps on a collage. Keep a scrap of paper handy to use as a mask. This allows you to block off areas of the collage where you don't want the stamp to print. I went back into my collection of handmade stamps and brought out this narrow stamp with small circles to add some variety to the overall design. Adding these stamp prints to the collage elevated the final design. I hope you found this video helpful. I really encourage you to try making your own stamps. Start by carving erasers with an X-Acto knife just to see if you enjoy the process before investing in carving blocks and tools. One more thing before I end this video, I decided this year to include other types of art videos besides mainly collage tutorials. I hope this is something you're interested in watching. If you have any specific video ideas, please leave those in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Take care.